How should I begin this story? Once upon a time, perhaps, but no, that's not right. That makes it a story of long ago and far away, and it's not that kind of story. It's not that kind of story at all. Better then to begin the tale as I remember it. After all, it is my story, mine to tell, mine in experience. I am old now, but I am not foolish. I still bar the doors and lock the windows at night. I still check the shadows before I sleep, and I give the dogs free roam through the house, for they will smell him if he comes again, and I will be ready for him. He will take no one from my house. He will steal no child from under my roof. My father was not such a careful man. He knew the old stories, for he told them to me when I was a small boy. Tales of the Sandman, who tears at the eyes of small boys who will not sleep, and Baba Yaga, the demon witch, who rides in a chariot of old bones and rests her palms on the skulls of children, and of Scylla, the sea monster, who drags men into the depths and has an appetite that can never be appeased. But he never spoke of the Earl King. All that my father would say was that I should never venture into the woods alone. I should never stay out beyond nightfall. There were things out there, he would say, wolves, and worse than wolves. Our family lived in a small house close to the edge of the forest at the northern end of our little village. It seemed that we lived our lives at the very edge of civilization, aware always that beyond us lay the wilderness of the forest. When we played in the schoolyard, our cries hung in the air for a moment, then seemed to be sucked beyond the tree line, our childish voices wandering lost between the trees before fading at last into nothingness. But beyond that tree line, a creature waited, and it drew our voices from the air like a hand plucking an apple from a tree, and it devoured us in its mind. There was a light dusting of snow upon the ground the earliest fall of winter when I first saw it. We were playing in a field by the church, chasing a red leather ball that stood out like blood upon the whiteness of the ground. A gust of wind arose where no wind had been before. It carried the ball upon it until it came to rest in a patch of young alders some distance into the forest. Unthinkingly I followed. As soon as I passed beyond the first of the first great trees, the air around me grew colder, and the voices of my companions were lost to me. I moved further into the forest, the imprint of my passing trailing behind me like an unseen rank of lost souls. I parted a cluster of alders, and I reached for the ball. And as I did so, the wind spoke to me. It said, "Boy, come to me, boy." I looked around, but there was no one near me. The voice came again, closer now, and in the shadows before me a figure moved. I thought at first that it was a branch of a tree, so thin and dark was it, its frame wrapped in grey as if spiders had spun a thick skein across it. But the branch reached out, and the twigs of its fingers gathered and beckoned. Waves of strange desire emanated from it. They washed over me like the tides of a polluted sea, leaving me filthy and soiled. "Boy, beautiful, delicate boy, come, boy, embrace me." I grabbed the ball and backed away, but my foot caught on one of the twisted roots beneath the snow. I fell heavily on my back, and a light thread touched my face. It was a gossamer strand of web, strong and sticky, which clung to my hair and seemed to coil around my fingers as I tried to push it away. I struggled to open my mouth and cry out, but the threads were falling thickly now, and they descended upon my tongue and tangled themselves around it so I could not speak. The being advanced, silver web heralding its approach, and the mesh seemed to tighten upon me as it moved. With all the strength that I had, I pushed myself backwards upon the ground, and felt the strands catching on the roots, tearing apart and freeing me from their grasp. Branches scratched my face, and snow gathered in my boots as I burst through the tree line, the ball still in my hands. And as I drew away, that voice came again. Boy, beautiful boy. And I knew that it wanted me. That night I could not sleep. I recalled the web and the voice from the darkness of the forest, and my eyes refused to close. I twisted and I turned, but I could find no rest. Despite the cold outside, the room was unbearably warm, so that I was forced to kick the sheet from my body and lay naked upon the bed. Yet I must have drifted into sleep, for it seemed that something caused my eyes to flicker open, and I found the light in the room was no longer what it had been. There were shadows in the corners where no shadows belonged. They shifted and twisted, but the trees outside remained undisturbed, and the curtains on the windows hung still and unmoving. And then I heard it, a soft, low voice, like the rustling of dead leaves. Boy! In that corner, a presence seemed to hover. At first it was almost shapeless, like an old blanket that had begun to rot, and strands of spiderweb filigreed themselves upon it. The moonlight illuminated folds of faded, wrinkled skin that hung across its stick-thin arms like old bark. Ivy curled around its limbs and wreathed the thin fingers that now beckoned to me from the shadows. Where its face might have been, there were only dead leaves and darkness, except its mouth, where small white teeth glistened. Come to me, boy. Let me hold you. No, no, go away, I said. At the end of its fingers, an oval shape glistened. It was a mirror, its frame carefully ornamented with shapes like dragons chasing each other around the edges. Look, boy, a gift for you, if you let me embrace you. The mirror's face was turned to me, and for an instant I saw my own face reflected in its surface. For that single fleeting moment I was not alone in the mirror's bright reaches. Other faces crowded around mine, tiny faces, tens, hundreds, thousands of them, a whole legion of the lost. Small fists beat the glass as if hoping to break through to the other side, and among them, its eyes huge with terror, I saw my own face, and I knew that this is how it could be. I am the Earl King. I have always been, and I will always be. I am the Earl King, and I take what I desire. Would you deny me my desire? Come with me, and I will give you treasures and toys. I will give you sweet things to eat, and I will call you beloved until the day you die. With all the strength of will I could muster, I sprang from my bed and leapt for the door. Behind me came the sound of leaves rustling and branches scraping. I twisted the door handle, but the sweat from my palms made it slippery and treacherous. I fumbled once, then again. The stench of rotting vegetation grew stronger in my nostrils. I let out a little whine of panic, and then the doorknob was turning, my feet were on the passageway, and branches were scraping at my back. I wrenched myself away, and with one twisting motion I pulled the door closed behind me. I should have run to my father, but some instinct sent me to the fireplace where the last flickering embers of the fire still remained. I took a stick from the woodpile, wrapped a rag around it, and soaked it in oil from the lamp. I plunged it into the fire, and watched as the flames leapt before me. I lifted a hearthrug from the floor and wrapped it around my body. Then, my bare feet slapping softly on the cold flagstones, I made my way back to my room. I listened silently before turning the handle of the door and pushing it open slowly before me. The room was empty. The only shadows that moved came from the flickering of the flame. I made my way to the corner where the Earl King had stood, but now there were only cobwebs and the drained husks of dead insects. I stood at the window, but the woods beyond were quiet. I pulled the window closed but as I stretched to do so, I became aware of a pain in my back. I reached behind me, and my fingers came back with blood at the tips. In the small shard of mirror that hung above my jug bowl, I could see a series of 4 long slashes across my back. I thought that I screamed, except that no noise came from my lips. Instead, the scream came from the room where my father and mother both slept, and I followed the sound. In the spluttering torchlight, I saw my father at the open window, and my mother on her knees beside the overturned cradle where my younger brother slept each night, swaddled in blankets. Now there was no sleeping infant. The blankets were strewn across the floor, and a dense, loamy smell, as of rotting leaves and still waters, hung in the room. My mother never recovered. She cried and cried, until at last she could cry no more, and then body and spirit surrendered themselves to eternal night. My father grew old and quiet, and the sadness hung around him like mist. I could not confess to him that I had denied the Earl King, and that he had taken another in my place. I carried the blame inside me, and I vowed I would never let him take another being who was under my protection. Now I lock the windows and bar the doors to the outside, and give the dogs free roam of the house. My children's rooms are never locked, so I can reach them quickly day or night, and I warn them that if they hear knocking of branches at their windows, they must call me, and never, ever open the window themselves. And in the light of the fire, I tell them tales of the Sandman who tears out the eyes of small boys who will not sleep, and of Baba Yaga, the demon witch who rides in a chariot of old bones and rests her palms on the skulls of children, and Scylla, who drags sailors into the depths and has an appetite that can never be appeased. And I will tell them of the Earl King, with his arms of bark and ivy, and his soft rustling voice, and his gifts to trap the unwary, and his appetites which are much worse than anything they can imagine. I tell them of his desires, so they will know him in all his forms, and they will be ready for him when he comes.